She walked into Maison Laurent with a scratched Timex on her wrist, unaware that beneath her modest appearance lay a secret that would bring the luxury watch empire to its knees. The sales associate sneered, the manager laughed, and the wealthy clientele mocked her department store special. But when Eleanor Whitmore finally opened that velvet case, revealing timepieces that belonged in museums, the entire store fell silent. What happened next would forever change how they viewed true wealth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast golden rays through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Maison Laurent, Manhattan's most exclusive horological boutique. Crystal chandeliers scattered rainbow prisms across Italian marble floors, while armed security guards stood, sentinel beside display cases, housing watches worth more than most homes. The air carried the subtle scent of leather and old money, a perfume that whispered of generational wealth and untouchable status. Eleanor Whitmore pushed through the heavy glass doors, her presence immediately jarring against the boutique's refined atmosphere. At 42, she possessed an understated beauty that required no enhancement. Steel grey eyes that missed nothing, dark hair pulled into a simple ponytail, and hands that moved with the careful precision of someone who understood the value of patience. Her navy cardigan had seen better days. Her comfortable flats were scuffed at the edges, and on her wrist sat a basic Timex with a leather band worn thin from years of daily wear. The boutique's morning crowd consisted of its usual clientele. Investment bankers comparing latest acquisitions, trophy wives selecting anniversary gifts, and trust fund heirs treating six-figure purchases like pocket change. They moved through the space with practiced ease, their designer clothes and perfect smiles as much a part of the decor as the Persian rugs beneath their feet. Marcus Rothschild, the store's senior sales director, noticed Eleanor immediately. His practiced eye catalogued her appearance in seconds. The absence of designer labels, the practical handbag, the modest watch that probably cost less than his morning latte. He smoothed his Hermes tie and exchanged knowing glances with his colleague, Sophia Chen, whose commission-driven smile faltered at the sight of their new visitor. "Can I help you?" Marcus approached with the particular tone reserved for customers who'd clearly wandered into the wrong establishment. His eyes lingered pointedly on Eleanor's Timex, a slight curl of disdain tugging at his lips. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "I'm interested in viewing your vintage collection." Several nearby customers paused their conversations. Victoria Hamilton Pierce, heiress to a pharmaceutical fortune, actually lowered her phone mid-selfie to stare. The vintage collection at Maison Laurent wasn't simply viewed. It required appointments, references, and often proof of serious buying intent. Sophia stepped forward, her Cartier watch catching the light as she gestured dismissively. "I'm afraid our vintage pieces start at 200,000. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the mall. I believe Macy's has a lovely selection of fashion watches." The insult landed precisely as intended. A ripple of suppressed laughter moved through the nearby customers. James Thornton III, whose family owned half of Connecticut's coastline, didn't bother hiding his smirk. "Lost tourist," he muttered to his companion, loud enough to carry. Eleanor's fingers unconsciously touched her Timex, a gesture that only amplified the contrast between her and everyone else in the room. "This watch has kept perfect time for 15 years, she said quietly. "Not everything valuable needs to cost a fortune." Marcus actually laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "Sweetheart, you're wearing a $40 watch in a store where our cheapest timepiece costs more than most cars. Maybe it's time to upgrade from that gas station special?" The boutique's atmosphere had shifted, the morning's gentle commerce replaced by the electric tension of public humiliation. Customers gathered like spectators at a gladiator match, their phones discreetly recording what promised to be premium social media content. The hashtag #BuyWatchFail was already forming in several minds. Penelope Ashford, draped in Chanel and wearing a rainbow of precious stones, stage whispered to her shopping partner, "How do these people even find places like this? Don't they realize Maison Laurent has standards?" The security guard near the door shifted uncomfortably, clearly debating whether to escort Eleanor out. The situation was beginning to affect the store's carefully cultivated ambiance of exclusivity and discretion. Eleanor stood perfectly still, absorbing each barb with the patience of someone playing a much longer game. Her grey eyes moved slowly across the room, cataloguing faces, remembering names from overheard conversations, filing away every sneer and whispered insult. "I'd still like to see the vintage collection," she repeated, her voice steady despite the hostile audience. Marcus's patience finally snapped. "Listen, I don't know if you're confused or just delusional, but this isn't some pawn shop where you can window shop dreams you can't afford. That Timex on your wrist, it's not just cheap, it's an insult to everything we represent here." He gestured broadly at the gleaming display cases. "Do you see that Patek Philippe? It costs more than you'll make in 5 years. That Audemars and Piguet, its service alone could buy 100 of your watches. You don't belong here." The words echoed through the suddenly silent boutique. Even the most jaded customers felt a twinge of discomfort at the naked cruelty, though none spoke up. Sophia added her voice to the assault, her commission goals overriding any sense of decency. "Mr. Rothschild is right. We cater to serious collectors, not dreamers with catalog watches. The exit is right behind you." Eleanor's hand moved to her bag, her movements deliberate and unhurried. "Serious collectors," she repeated softly, almost to herself. "Tell me, Mr. Rothschild, what makes a serious collector? Is it the size of their bank account, the logos on their clothes, or is it something else entirely?" Victoria Hamilton Pierce interjected with practiced cruelty, "It's knowing your place, darling, and yours certainly isn't here." The laughter that followed felt like physical blows, each chuckle another stone thrown at Eleanor's dignity. The boutique had transformed from a temple of luxury into an arena of social execution, with Eleanor as the designated victim. Yet she didn't retreat. Instead, Eleanor pulled out her phone, her fingers moving across the screen with surprising speed. "Interesting perspective," she murmured, still typing. "I wonder what the horological community would think of a store that judges collectors by their appearance rather than their knowledge or passion." Marcus rolled his eyes. "Oh, please. Are you going to leave us a bad Yelp review? Threaten us with your dozens of Instagram followers? This isn't that kind of establishment, sweetheart." The contempt in his voice could have curdled cream. Sophia nodded in agreement, adding, "Maison Laurent has served royalty, presidents, and titans of industry. We don't concern ourselves with the opinions of." She gestured vaguely at Eleanor's outfit. "The general public." The phrase hung in the air like a noose. The general public. The unwashed masses. The people who pressed their faces against windows they could never afford to enter. In 2 words, Sophia had relegated Eleanor to the realm of the permanently excluded. James Thornton III pulled out his Vacheron Constantin and checked the time, with exaggerated concern. "Shouldn't you be getting back to work? That Timex won't pay for itself." The room erupted in laughter, the sound bouncing off marble and crystal like bullets. Eleanor weathered it all, her face composed, her eyes taking in every detail. She slipped her phone back into her bag and withdrew something else, a small, worn leather notebook. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You know what's fascinating about watches?" she asked, opening the notebook with reverent care. "They're honest. They don't care who wears them or what others think. They just keep time, marking moments that matter. Marcus snorted. Fascinating. Philosophy. Very Pinterest. Now, unless you're planning to actually buy something... I am, Eleanor interrupted, her voice cutting through his dismissal like a blade through silk. But first, I have a question for you, Mr. Rothschild. In all your years here, have you ever seen a Patek Philippe reference 1518 in steel? The question landed like a grenade. Marcus blinked, thrown off balance. The reference 1518 in steel was one of the rarest watches in existence. Only 4 were ever made. Each one was worth more than the entire inventory of most watch stores. Of course not, he recovered quickly. Those are museum pieces, private collections. Why would... Because I own one, Eleanor said simply. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the soft tick of hundreds of luxury timepieces seemed to pause. Sophia laughed nervously, the sound high and brittle. That's impossible. You're wearing a Timex. You can't possibly... Eleanor turned a page in her notebook revealing a photograph. Not just any photograph, but one that showed a reference 1518 in steel. Its distinctive dial unmistakable even in the slightly faded image. Beside it lay documentation, provenance papers, auction records, insurance valuations. This particular piece, Eleanor continued conversationally, was purchased by my grandfather in 1954. He wore it every day while building his shipping empire. When he passed, it came to me. Victoria Hamilton Pierce had gone pale. Her family collected watches, and she knew enough to recognize the truth when she saw it. That watch is worth more than this entire store, Eleanor suggested helpfully. Yes, considerably more. The leather notebook revealed more treasures. A Rolex Paul Newman Daytona, a Vacheron Constantin reference 57260, watches that existed more in legend than reality. Each image was accompanied by meticulous documentation, the kind of provenance that serious collectors spent lifetimes establishing. But why the Timex? Sophia's voice had lost all its earlier confidence. Eleanor smiled for the first time, the expression transforming her face. Because it tells time just as well, and it doesn't make people assume things about me. I learned long ago that true collectors don't advertise. We appreciate. Marcus had turned an interesting shade of grey. His mind raced, calculating the commission he'd just lost, the client relationship he'd destroyed, the viral social media disaster brewing in the room. Mrs. Whitmore, we had no idea. Of course you didn't, Eleanor agreed pleasantly. You were too busy judging the cover to wonder about the book. Tell me, how many other collectors have you driven away with this behavior? The question hung unanswered. James Thornton III quietly slipped his phone into his pocket, suddenly fascinated by his shoes. Victoria Hamilton Pierce had backed away, her earlier cruelty evaporating like morning mist. Eleanor closed her notebook with gentle finality. I came here today because I heard Maison Laurent had acquired a Breguet Marie Antoinette. I chairs the acquisition committee for the Metropolitan Horological Museum. We're always interested in significant pieces. The implications crashed over Marcus like a tsunami. The Metropolitan Horological Museum didn't just buy watches, they set market values, established reputations, made or broke dealers. Their acquisition committee was more exclusive than any country club, more powerful than any collectors group. The Marie Antoinette, he stammered. Yes, it's in our vault. I could arrange a viewing immediately, perhaps in our private salon, with champagne. Eleanor's grey eyes held his for a long moment. No, thank you. I don't believe Maison. Laurent is the kind of establishment we want to work with. You've made it very clear that you judge worth by appearance rather than substance. She turned to address the room, her voice carrying clearly. Real luxury isn't about price tags or brand names. It's about craftsmanship, history, passion. It's about respecting the art, not the artifice. With that, Eleanor Whitmore walked toward the exit, her Timex glinting in the morning sun. Behind her, the boutique buzzed with frantic whispers, phones capturing the aftermath of what would become known as the Maison Laurent meltdown. Outside, Eleanor paused on the sidewalk, looking back through the windows at the chaos she'd left behind. Her phone buzzed with a message from the museum board. Heard about Maison Laurent incident. Well played, dinner Thursday to discuss? She smiled, adjusting her faithful Timex. Sometimes the best lessons were taught not with words, but with perfect timing. The following week, Eleanor returned to Maison Laurent, this time carrying an unassuming leather briefcase that seemed as ordinary as her faded Timex. The morning crowd consisted of different faces, but the atmosphere remained unchanged, an air of exclusivity that hung like expensive perfume over every polished surface. Word of the previous incident had spread through Manhattan's collector circles like wildfire, yet the staff pretended nothing had happened. Marcus Rothschild spotted her immediately, his perfectly groomed appearance now tinged with nervous energy. He rushed forward, nearly colliding with a display case in his haste. Mrs. Whitmore, what an unexpected pleasure. Please, allow me to escort you to our private viewing room. Eleanor's grey eyes swept the boutique, noting how several customers suddenly found their phones fascinating. That won't be necessary, Marcus. I prefer to conduct my business here in the open. Sophia Chen emerged from the back office, her designer heels clicking against marble like a countdown. Her face cycled through emotions, surprise, fear, then forced professionalism. Welcome back. Can we offer you anything? Champagne? Our newest acquisitions catalog. No, thank you. Eleanor set her briefcase on the nearest counter, the soft leather contrasting sharply with the glass and chrome. I've come to discuss a proposition. The words drew attention from every corner. A distinguished gentleman in a bespoke suit, Richard Blackstone, CEO of a major investment firm, paused his examination of a Jaeger LeCoultre. Near the window, Melissa Vanderbilt, whose family name graced several buildings in the financial district, lowered her coffee cup with deliberate slowness. A proposition? Marcus's voice cracked slightly. Of course, we're always interested in serious collectors. Perhaps we could... Eleanor raised her hand, silencing him. Before we proceed, I should clarify something. The Metropolitan Horological Museum's Acquisition Committee has been observing this establishment for quite some time. Not just the inventory, but the culture. She opened her briefcase with practiced movements, revealing not watches, but documents. Folders, photographs, printed emails, a paper trail that made Sophia step backward instinctively. 17. Collectors driven away by discriminatory treatment. 43 documented incidents of staff judging customers by appearance. Over 2 million in lost sales because your team couldn't see past designer labels. The numbers fell like hammer blows. Richard Blackstone moved closer, his interest clearly piqued. Melissa Vanderbilt had abandoned all pretense of shopping, her phone now recording openly. Marcus swallowed hard. Mrs. Whitmore, I assure you, these are isolated incidents. We pride ourselves on what exactly? Eleanor's voice remained conversational, but steel ran beneath the surface. Exclusivity. There's a difference between curating quality and cultivating cruelty. She withdrew a single photograph from the briefcase, a black and white image of a modest storefront. Do you recognize this building? Sophia leaned forward, squinting. It looks like, but that can't be. That's where Maison Laurent stands now. Correct. Except in 1952, it was Whitmore and Sons timepieces, my grandfather's shop. Eleanor let the revelation settle. He sold it to expand his shipping business, but he always regretted losing the direct connection to collectors. He believed watches were about stories, not status. The boutique had gone completely silent. Even the ambient music seemed to fade. Marcus's face had taken on the pallor of someone watching their world restructure itself. The building still belongs to our family. Trust, Eleanor continued. We lease it to Maison Laurent on a year-to-year basis. This year's renewal is next month. The implications crashed through the room like a tidal wave. Without the prestigious Fifth Avenue location, Maison Laurent would lose more than an address. They'd lose their identity, their cachet, their very reason for existing in the luxury ecosystem. Now, Eleanor closed the briefcase with a soft click. About that proposition. From her bag, she produced a different case, this one made of rich mahogany with brass fittings. Inside, nestled in midnight blue velvet, lay 3 watches that made even the jaded collectors gasp. The first was the Patek Philippe reference 1518 in steel she'd mentioned before, its silvered dial catching the light like captured moonbeams. Beside it sat a unique Vacheron Constantin with a cloisonné enamel dial depicting the Manhattan skyline. The third piece drew the most attention, a previously unknown prototype by George Daniels, the legendary independent watchmaker. These pieces, Eleanor explained, represent different philosophies of horology. The Patek shows what major houses can achieve. The Vacheron celebrates artistic collaboration. And the Daniels, it proves that innovation can come from anywhere, even a single craftsman working alone. Richard Blackstone had moved close enough to study the watches, his collector's eye bright with appreciation. That Daniels, I've never seen documentation of this piece. Because it was never sold publicly, George gave it to my grandfather after he helped fund Daniel's early work, not for profit, but because he believed in supporting talent. Melissa Vanderbilt raised her phone higher. Ah, you saying Maison Laurent could have exclusive access to pieces like these? Eleanor smiled, but her eyes remained on Marcus and Sophia. I'm saying Maison Laurent could become something more than a temple to price tags. These watches will go to institutions that understand their true value, not monetary but cultural, historical, educational. She reached into her briefcase, once more producing a bound proposal. The Whitmore Foundation is prepared to establish a partnership. We'll provide access to our collection for exhibitions, educational programs, and selective sales. In return, Maison Laurent must commit to fundamental changes. Marcus accepted the proposal with trembling hands. As he flipped through pages, his expression shifted from concern to disbelief to something approaching hope. A scholarship program for young watchmakers, public exhibition spaces, blind authentication services where pieces are evaluated without knowing the owner. He looked up. This would transform everything. That's the idea, Eleanor agreed. My grandfather believed luxury should elevate everyone it touches, not just those who can afford it. Sophia had been reading over Marcus's shoulder, her perfectly composed facade cracking, the staffing requirements, mandatory training in horological history, anonymous customer service trials. Consider it an investment in character, Eleanor suggested. Or would you prefer we find tenants who already understand these principles? The threat, delivered with surgical precision, left no room for negotiation. Around them, the boutique's customers had formed an impromptu audience. Several were already posting about witnessing history in the making. Richard Blackstone stepped forward. Mrs. Whitmore, I sit on the boards of several luxury brands. What you're proposing? It could revolutionize the industry. Or return it to its roots, Eleanor countered, before luxury became synonymous with exclusion. A young couple near the entrance, clearly tourists who'd wandered in by accident, watched the proceedings with wide eyes. The woman wore a simple Seiko, the man a basic Casio, Under normal circumstances, they would have been politely but firmly redirected to more appropriate establishments. Eleanor noticed them and smiled. "You two, come closer. Have you ever seen a grand complication up close?" They approached hesitantly, clearly overwhelmed. Eleanor selected the Vacheron Constantin from her case, holding it where they could admire the intricate dial. This enamel work took 6 months to complete. Each building in the skyline required dozens of firings. The artist went through 17 versions before achieving the perfect shade of sunset gold. The young woman leaned closer, her reflection mingling with the miniature Manhattan. "It's like wearing a whole city on your wrist." "Exactly," Eleanor beamed. "You understand perfectly. That's what horology should inspire. Wonder, not intimidation." Marcus watched the interaction with growing comprehension. For the first time in his career, he saw past price points to the pure joy of mechanical artistry. "Mrs. Whitmore, where do we sign?" Eleanor's smile widened. "First, I believe you have some apologies to make. Not just to me, but to every person. Your staff has dismissed based on appearances." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sophia straightened her shoulders, years of training warring with newfound humility. Finally, she stepped forward. "You're right. I've spent so long chasing commissions that I forgot why I entered this field. I apologize, not just for last week, but for every time I've made someone feel unwelcome here." Her confession opened floodgates. Marcus followed, his polished veneer cracking to reveal genuine remorse. Around the boutique, other staff members emerged from various corners, adding their own acknowledgements of past behavior. The young couple with the modest watches found themselves surrounded by apologetic sales associates, each eager to share knowledge without judgment. Richard Blackstone was already on his phone, arranging meetings to discuss similar initiatives with his portfolio companies. Eleanor returned the precious watches to their case, her movements reverent. "These pieces have taught me something over the years. The most complicated mechanisms can be surprisingly fragile, while simple movements often run for generations. Perhaps the same is true of businesses." She turned to address the growing crowd. "Maison Laurent has a choice: continue as a monument to exclusivity, or become a bridge between craftsmanship and appreciation. The lease renewal depends on this decision." Marcus and Sophia exchanged glances, years of corporate hierarchy dissolving in shared understanding. "We choose the bridge," Marcus declared, his voice carrying conviction it had previously lacked. "Excellent." Eleanor produced a preliminary agreement. "Let's start with basics. As of today, Maison Laurent will implement blind evaluations for all trade-ins and consignments. Customers will be served based on interest, not appearance. And that private viewing room, it becomes a learning center where anyone can study horology." The changes rippled through the space like stones in still water. Regular customers accustomed to preferential treatment bristled at the democratization, while others embraced the shift with unexpected enthusiasm. Melissa Vanderbilt approached Eleanor directly. "My family's foundation focuses on educational initiatives. We'd be interested in supporting the scholarship program." "And I," Richard Blackstone added, "can connect you with several independent watchmakers who'd love to participate in public workshops." The boutique buzzed with energy, entirely different from its usual refined hum. Conversations sparked between unlikely pairs, collectors sharing knowledge with newcomers, staff members discussing craft rather than credit limits, enthusiasts united by passion instead of divided by price points. Eleanor's phone vibrated with a message from the museum board. "Preliminary reports positive. Proceed with full proposal." She surveyed the transformation already taking root. Near the vintage collection, Sophia explained movement mechanics to the young tourist couple, her enthusiasm genuine rather than calculated. Marcus had abandoned his post by the premium displays to join a spirited discussion about restoration techniques. "One more thing," Eleanor announced, drawing attention back to herself. She reached for her wrist, unfastening the faithful Timex that had sparked everything. "This watch has served me well, but perhaps it's time for a change." She approached a display case containing pre-owned pieces, selecting a vintage Omega constellation. Nothing flashy, nothing extreme, just honest craftsmanship at a fair price. "I'd like to purchase this," she told a young sales associate who'd been hovering nervously at the periphery. His eyes widened. "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. I'll prepare the paperwork immediately." "No special treatment," Eleanor insisted. "Process it like any other sale, and please call me Eleanor." As the transaction completed, she fastened the Omega to her wrist, then held up the Timex. "Would anyone like to trade stories about their first watch?" The question opened floodgates. The tourist with the Seiko shared how she'd saved for months to buy it for her graduation. Richard Blackstone recalled inheriting his grandfather's railroad watch. Even Sophia contributed, describing a swatch her mother gave her that sparked her interest in horology. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting golden light through the boutique's windows. What had begun as a confrontation had evolved into something richer, a community forming around shared appreciation rather than exclusive ownership. Eleanor gathered her documents, preparing to leave. "The formal papers will arrive tomorrow. I trust you'll begin implementing changes immediately?" Marcus nodded emphatically. "We'll start with staff meetings tonight. By next week, Maison Laurent will be unrecognizable in the best possible way." As Eleanor reached the door, Sophia called out, "Wait! What will you do with the Timex?" Eleanor smiled, glancing at the simple watch that had catalyzed such transformation. "I thought I'd donate it to the learning center. First lesson, never judge a watch or a person by appearances alone." She stepped onto Fifth Avenue, leaving behind a boutique already buzzing with change. Behind her, conversations continued, barriers fell, and a new chapter in luxury retail began to write itself. Her phone rang, the museum director. "Eleanor, the board's approved everything. Also, Bernard Arnault's office called. LVMH wants to discuss implementing similar programs across their watch brands." "Tell them we'll meet," Eleanor replied, checking her new Omega. "But first, I have a lease renewal to finalize." She walked north, the afternoon sun warming her face. In her wake, Maison Laurent's windows reflected not just luxury watches, but the faces of all who now felt welcome to appreciate them. The revolution had begun with a single Timex, proof that sometimes the smallest gears drive the greatest changes. Inside the boutique, Marcus stood before his assembled staff, the Whitmore Foundation proposal open before him. "Everything changes today," he announced. "Our founder believed in excellence through inclusion. It's time we remembered that." Heads nodded around the room. Sophia had already begun revising training manuals. The security guard, who'd once considered escorting Eleanor out, now suggested community open houses. Innovation sparked from unexpected corners, fed by the oxygen of fresh perspective. By evening, news had spread through Manhattan's collector community. Forums buzzed with debate, social media exploded with opinions, and waiting lists formed for the upcoming educational programs. Maison Laurent had become the center of a movement nobody saw coming. Eleanor's legacy, or rather her grandfather's legacy renewed, had taken root in the most unlikely soil. A temple of exclusivity transformed into a bridge of appreciation, all because someone wearing a simple watch had refused to be simple herself. As night fell over Fifth Avenue, the boutique's lights blazed brighter than ever. Inside, conversations continued past closing time. Staff members who'd never spoken as equals now planned collaborative futures. Customers who'd competed for status now shared knowledge freely. The security cameras captured it all, not for loss prevention, but for history. Somewhere in the archives, future generations would study this day as the moment luxury remembered its purpose, not to divide, but to inspire, not to exclude, but to elevate. And it all began with a woman, a watch, and the courage to reveal that true worth runs deeper than any display case can contain. 6 months after Eleanor Whitmore's dramatic revelation at Maison Laurent, Manhattan's luxury watch scene had transformed beyond recognition. The boutique that once epitomized exclusivity now stood as a beacon of accessibility, its windows displaying not just million-dollar timepieces, but also educational exhibits that drew crowds from all walks of life. The morning of the grand reopening arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if nature itself approved of the changes. Eleanor stood across Fifth Avenue, observing the transformed storefront with quiet satisfaction. Gone were the intimidating security guards and velvet ropes. In their place stood volunteer docents, enthusiastic collectors eager to share their knowledge with anyone who showed interest. Marcus Rothschild emerged from the entrance, barely recognizable from the dismissive sales director he'd been 6 months ago. His designer suit remained impeccable, but his demeanor had softened, his smile genuine rather than calculated. He spotted Eleanor and jogged across the street, dodging early morning traffic. "The response has been incredible," he said, slightly breathless. "We've had people camping overnight, not for limited editions, but for the watchmaking workshops. Local news wants to do a feature on the transformation." Eleanor adjusted her Omega constellation, the watch she'd purchased on that pivotal day. Sometimes the most radical act is simply treating people with respect. "Are you ready for this?" "I should be asking you that," Marcus replied. "After all, this is really your grandfather's vision coming full circle." They walked back across the street together, joining the growing crowd. The renovation had been extensive but thoughtful. The luxury aesthetic remained, but now it felt inviting rather than intimidating. Interactive displays explained movement complications, while a glass-walled workshop allowed visitors to watch master craftsmen at work. Sophia Chen stood at the entrance greeting arrivals, her transformation even more dramatic than Marcus's. The woman who once sneered at Eleanor's Timex now wore a vintage Seiko, chosen not for its price, but for its historical significance in democratizing automatic movements. "Mrs. Whitmore," she beamed, "you won't believe who's here. Sarah Mitchell from the Times, 3 documentary filmmakers, and..." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Philippe Dufour himself flew in from Switzerland." Eleanor's eyes widened. Dufour was perhaps the greatest living independent watchmaker, his pieces so rare that collectors waited decades for the privilege of purchasing one. "He's here?" "In the workshop, teaching a masterclass on hand finishing. He said your grandfather once helped him when he was starting out. He wanted to honor that debt." The morning crowd represented a cross-section of society impossible to imagine in the old Maison Laurent. Wall Street executives mingled with art students. Retired teachers examined complications alongside tech entrepreneurs. Children pressed their noses against cases while their parents explained mechanical principles. At precisely 10 a.m., Marcus took the podium set up in the main showroom. Behind him hung 2 portraits, one of Eleanor's grandfather, William Whitmore, the other of René Laurent, the boutique's original founder. Both men shared similar expressions of quiet determination. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly, "welcome to the reopening of Maison Laurent, though perhaps rebirth is more accurate. 6 months ago, a remarkable woman walked into our establishment and showed us we'd lost our way. We'd forgotten that horology isn't about exclusion. It's about inclusion, education, and shared passion." Applause rippled through the crowd. Eleanor tried to fade into the background, but Sophia gently pushed her forward. Today marks not just a reopening, but a recommitment to values both our founders shared. William Whitmore believed watches tell stories. René Laurent believed in making excellence accessible. We lost sight of those principles, but Eleanor Whitmore helped us find them again. Marcus gestured to a covered display, which brings us to our first announcement. In partnership with the Whitmore Foundation, we're proud to introduce the Compass Collection. Affordable mechanical watches designed by master craftsmen, manufactured to the highest standards and priced for accessibility rather than exclusivity. The cover lifted to reveal 12 watches, each unique yet clearly part of a cohesive vision. They featured in-house movements visible through exhibition casebacks, cases crafted from recycled ocean plastic and ethically sourced metals, and dials that celebrated different aspects of horological history. Each piece is named for a virtue: patience, precision, perseverance, Marcus continued. They'll retail for under $1,000, with proceeds supporting watchmaking education in underserved communities. The announcement sparked excited discussions. Photography was not only allowed but encouraged, a sharp departure from the old policies that treated every piece like a state secret. Eleanor found herself surrounded by journalists and collectors, all eager for her perspective. She deflected attention toward the craftspeople and educators who'd made the transformation possible, but one persistent reporter from Bloomberg wouldn't be deterred. Mrs. Whitmore, there are rumors that LVMH and Richmond are both developing similar initiatives. How does it feel to have sparked an industry-wide revolution? Change happens when people remember their purpose, Eleanor replied carefully. My grandfather used to say that a watch's true value isn't in its price tag, but in the moments it marks. If we've helped others remember that, then we've succeeded. As interviews continued, a commotion arose near the Vintage Watch Clinic, a new feature where experts offered free evaluations and basic maintenance. An elderly man clutched a battered shoebox, tears streaming down his weathered face as Philippe Dufour himself examined its contents. Extraordinary, the master watchmaker murmured, holding up a piece that looked utterly unremarkable to untrained eyes. This is a prototype Daniel space traveler, one of only 3 made before the design was refined. Where did you get this? The old man's voice shook. My father worked as a machinist. He helped Mr. Daniels with some components in the early days. Gave this to Dad as thanks. I've been afraid to show it to anyone. Thought they'd laugh at an old man with delusions. Delusions. Dufour's voice rose with indignation. This is horological history. Museums would give anything for this piece. He turned to the growing crowd. This is why we must remain humble. Treasures lurk in unexpected places, carried by people we might thoughtlessly dismiss. The moment perfectly encapsulated the new Maison Laurent's philosophy. Within minutes, arrangements were being made to display the watch in a special exhibition, with full credit to its owner and his father's contribution to watchmaking history. Eleanor watched the scene unfold with deep satisfaction. This was exactly what her grandfather had envisioned. A place where passion trumped pedigree, where stories mattered more than status symbols. Sophia appeared at her elbow, clutching a leather portfolio. Eleanor, I have something to show you. We found these in the archives while renovating. Inside were photographs from the 1950s showing William Whitmore and René Laurent working together, designing watches at a shared workbench. Letters revealed their friendship and shared vision, one that had somehow been lost as success bred complacency. They were partners, Eleanor breathed, studying a photograph of the 2 men, laughing over technical drawings. Not just business associates, but friends united by purpose. Which is why we want to make another announcement, Marcus said, joining them. The Whitmore Laurent Fellowship, funding collaborative projects between established manufacturers and independent craftspeople. Your grandfather and our founder would have wanted this. The day continued with workshop demonstrations, historical presentations, and countless conversations between people who would never have met in the old paradigm. Fashion models discussed escapement theory with mechanics. CEOs learned basic maintenance, alongside students, and everyone felt equally welcome. As afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows, Eleanor found herself alone in the archive room, surrounded by documents chronicling both triumph and failure. A soft knock interrupted her reverie. "I hope I'm not intruding." She turned to find David Chen, a young watchmaker whose scholarship application had been the first approved under the new program. In his hands was a wooden presentation box. "I wanted to thank you personally," he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning timepiece. "This is my first complete watch. I call it Redemption." The watch was beautiful in its simplicity, a time-only piece with a hand-guilloché dial that seemed to shift colors as it caught the light. Through the exhibition caseback, Eleanor could see movement components finished to a standard that would shame many luxury brands. "The dial pattern represents transformation," David explained. "How something broken can become something beautiful if you're willing to do the work." Eleanor was touched beyond words. "It's magnificent. You'll go far." "I already have," he replied. "6 months ago, I was turned away from this very store. They said I didn't look like a watchmaker. Today, I'm teaching others. That's because of you." As evening approached, the celebration moved to the rooftop terrace, transformed into a garden space where customers could relax and discuss their shared passion. The Manhattan skyline provided a glittering backdrop as champagne flutes clinked and conversations flourished. Marcus found Eleanor by the railing, watching the sunset. "Paint the city in shades of gold and amber. The sales figures are remarkable," he reported. "Not just the high-end pieces. The educational materials and entry-level mechanicals are flying off shelves. People want to learn, not just consume." "My grandfather always said the best marketing is genuine enthusiasm," Eleanor smiled. "Create a value beyond the transaction, and success follows naturally." Speaking of creating value, Marcus hesitated, then pulled out his phone. "I've been getting calls all day. Patek Vacheron, even some automotive luxury brands. They all want to know how we did it. How do we package this transformation?" Eleanor laughed, the sound carrying across the terrace. "That's exactly the thinking that created the problem. This isn't a marketing strategy. It's a return to fundamental values. You can't package authenticity." As the party continued, Eleanor noticed a familiar face hovering at the edges of the crowd. James Thornton III, the entitled heir who'd mocked her Timex 6 months ago, stood uncertainly by the elevator. She approached him directly. "Mr. Thornton, I'm surprised to see you here." He shifted uncomfortably, his usual bravado absent. I owe you an apology. What I said that day was inexcusable. I've been thinking about it ever since. And I realized I've spent my whole life confusing price with value. My great-grandfather built railroads with his bare hands. He wore a $10 pocket watch and created an empire. Somewhere along the line, we forgot that." He pulled out his phone, showing her a photo. "I've been volunteering at the Horological Society, teaching kids about mechanical engineering through watchmaking. It's the most rewarding thing I've ever done." Eleanor smiled warmly. "Your great-grandfather would be proud. Real wealth is what you build, not what you buy." As the evening wound down, the final surprise awaited. Sophia stepped to the microphone, tapping it gently for attention. "Before we conclude this wonderful day, we have one more announcement. Eleanor, would you join me?" Confused but curious, Eleanor approached the small stage. Marcus joined them, carrying an ornate wooden box. 6 months ago, Eleanor Whitmore showed us that courage isn't about grand gestures. It's about standing firm in your principles, Sophia began. She reminded us that luxury without accessibility is just exclusivity, and exclusivity without purpose is merely vanity. Marcus opened the box, revealing a breathtaking watch. The master craftsman of Switzerland, inspired by your example, collaborated to create this unique piece. We call it the compass because you helped us find our way. The watch was a masterpiece of subtle complexity. Its dial featured a compass rose rendered in different precious metals, each point representing one of the 8 virtues Eleanor had demonstrated: courage, wisdom, patience, integrity, generosity, humility, perseverance, and vision. Flip it over, Marcus urged. The caseback bore an engraving to Eleanor Whitmore, who showed us that true luxury elevates all it touches. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes as she fastened the watch to her wrist. It sat perfectly beside her grandfather's signet ring, old and new, harmonizing beautifully. This isn't just recognition, Sophia continued. It's a promise. Every maison, Laurent location worldwide, will follow the principles you established. We've already begun training programs in Mumbai, workshops in Tokyo, and scholarships in Sao Paulo. The revolution you started here is going global. The applause that followed felt different from the polite clapping of 6 months ago. This was genuine appreciation, shared joy in a vision realized. As guests began departing, each taking with them not just purchases but renewed purpose, Eleanor remained on the terrace. The city lights sparkled like complications in a grand celestial movement, each point of light a story waiting to be told. Marcus joined her one final time. You know, I never asked, what happened to your Timex? Eleanor smiled, reaching into her purse. The simple watch lay nestled in soft cloth, its scratched crystal catching the light. I keep it as a reminder. Not all valuable things are expensive, and not all expensive things have value. Do you miss it? Every day. But that's the point, isn't it? To appreciate what we have while reaching for what we might become. As she headed for the elevator, Eleanor glanced back at the transformed space. The boutique hummed with energy, even as closing time approached. Staff members excitedly planning tomorrow's workshops, customers lingering over displays that educated as much as they enticed. Her phone buzzed with a message from her daughter. Saw the ceremony online. Grandpa would be so proud. When are you teaching me about movements? Eleanor smiled, typing back, this weekend. Bring your questions. Outside, Fifth Avenue pulsed. With life, she walked slowly, savoring the cool evening air. In her wake, the lights of Maison Laurent blazed not with exclusivity, but with invitation, not with arrogance, but with aspiration. 6 months ago, she had entered that building as an intruder in their temple of privilege. Tonight, she left as the architect of its rebirth. The watch on her wrist counted the seconds, each tick marking another moment in a revolution that began with a simple truth. Respect costs nothing, but changes everything. The security guard at the door, the same one who had once considered escorting her out, tipped his hat respectfully. Have a good evening, Mrs. Whitmore. See you tomorrow. Of course, Robert, we're just getting started. And they were. Across the city, across the industry, the ripples of change continued to spread. In boardrooms and workshops, classrooms and conventions, people began to question old assumptions about luxury, value, and accessibility. The revolution had begun with a woman and her Timex, but it would continue through countless others who now understood that true worth isn't worn on the wrist, it's carried in the heart. As Eleanor disappeared into the Manhattan night, her legacy was already taking root, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful statement isn't made by what you wear, but by how you wear it, with dignity, purpose, and an unwavering belief that excellence belongs to all who seek it. The transformation of Maison Laurent would be studied in business schools, debated in boardrooms, and celebrated in communities worldwide. But for Eleanor Whitmore, it was simply a promise kept. To her grandfather, to herself, and to everyone who'd ever been judged by their cover rather than their character. As one revolution ended, another began. The time had finally come for luxury to remember its purpose, not to divide, but to inspire, not to exclude, but to elevate, not to hoard beauty, but to share it with all who could appreciate its deeper meaning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.